Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Hami. In today's program, we are going to take up two important developments of a discussion. One relates to an important presser by the DG ISPR, Major General Ahmed Sharif, and the second one relates to a significant visit by Chief of Army Staff, General Syed Asim Munir, to China. Let's start with the first one. DG ISPR, Major General Ahmed Sharif, during yesterday's important presser, talked about the situation at the line of control, the situation along the western border, and also talked about Army's position regarding the respect towards politicians and political parties, also talking about the freedom of expression and the limits as per the law regarding that one also. Specifically, when we talk about the situation at the Western Front, he categorically said that Pakistan Army is focused on rooting out terrorism, and also gave certain statistics, and he also told that security forces conducted around 8,269 intelligence-based operations in the ongoing year, and as a result of which 1,525 terrorists were either killed or arrested. And he also said to rid the country of the menace of terrorism, on daily basis around 70 operations are being conducted. And he also categorically said that there are no-go areas in the country. Regarding the fencing along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, he said it was 98% complete, and along the Pakistan-Iran border, he said it was 85% complete. Specifically talking about the situation at the line of control, he said, let me quote, that the situation at the line of control has remained relatively peaceful after the restoration of 2003 ceasefire agreement. But at the same time, he criticized India for the fake propaganda. And he also said that Pakistan allowed UN observers complete access to the LOC, but India hasn't done so. And he also told that India violated LOC 56 times in the ongoing year. And Pakistan Army struck down 6 spy quadcopters, and said that Pakistan Army is prepared to deal with any such attempts by India. Let me quickly bring in our panelists to talk about this particular first development. In the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Professor Dr. Auqaab Alizai. He is associated with Center for International Peace and Stability at NUST. Dr. Auqaab, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are being joined by Lieutenant General Retired Raza Muhammad Khan. He is former President of National Defense University. General Raza, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. At the same time, on Skype, we are being joined by Mr. Parvez Jamil Mir. He is Senior Journalist. Mr. Mir, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Now, let me quickly begin the discussion with you, Dr. Auqaab. The kind of statistics that have been shared by DG ISPR speaks volumes about the vigilance and the readiness and the preparedness of the Pakistan Armed Forces, along with other law enforcement agencies who are determined to root out terrorism. How bigger this wave of terrorism in Pakistan is for Pakistan, and how do you see Pakistan's army and law enforcement agencies dealing with this menace once again?
I think that with a certain passing of time, that the Taliban coming to power again in Afghanistan has led to more emboldened action by these terrorist groups, and numerous ones, not just the TTP, but also the national separatists, BLA. And I think that Pakistan did have a certain delay in this, primarily because they wanted to have appeasement talks to try to facilitate some type of talk, but and come to a negotiated settlement, which is a preferred method to do things in a political environment which is unstable, because Pakistan is in a very vulnerable condition right now. And I think because of the vulnerability that Pakistan is economically especially, and the different linkages and realignments in the geostrategic perspective, that Pakistan needs to take more affirmative action. And as a result, this has come to light. And Pakistan has been ongoing in its operations. It's been consistent in this for the past year or so, especially. And there have been numerous people have been arrested and killed, these terrorists that I'm talking about. Over 1,500 in the past year or so. So that's quite a lot as far as Pakistan is concerned, but also to indicate to the country and shore up the belief that we're not complacent, that we are not just standing by, and that we are here and we will aggressively pursue the terrorists to facilitate peace in the country. And these spoilers have taken advantage of Pakistan's interest and taken advantage of the situation that we're in at this moment in time. I think it's further paramount to understand that the population, the people, are suffering heavily because of the economics downturn in Pakistan and the political instability. And as a result, the army must show that it is the defender of the people and defender of the country and the borders of the country, and that it is its paramount obligation and responsibility to the country. And recent criticisms about the military and media sensationalism, partially and even more so, has been directed by false narratives by India to undermine Pakistan's political and military establishment, you could say, and to divide the people from the leadership and divide the people from the army, especially in social media. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of young people who don't understand really what's going on in this country tend to promote this without realizing what they're actually doing to the country. The country is a solid country. It doesn't have issues that are made out to be by false narratives and false propaganda by external parties, multiple different external parties. And I think it is time that we stand our ground. I think it's time that we state exactly what we are doing, and it's time to say that we are not broken, that Pakistan is fully fledged into maintaining peace and prosperity in the country.
Right.
And that's number one objective, is to make sure that any form of threat inside and outside is dealt with in every which way possible.
Right, let me bring in General Raza into the discussion also. General Raza, the kind of statistics that have been laid forth by the DG ISPRs speak volume about the kind of determination Pakistan Armed Forces have to root out terrorism. So when we specifically talk about the fencing, which is 98% complete as per the DG ISPR along the Pak-Afghan border, how important is the support from the Afghan Taliban to protect this particular fencing? That has been a gigantic task, and Pakistan had to pay a lot of sacrifices in that particular exercise also.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think, first of all, it is important that Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan agree to jointly manage and defend their borders, because the threats that are emanating from Afghanistan, whether they are in the form of TTP, the Jamaat al-Ahrar, or the BLA, or Al-Qaeda, ISIS, I think they are posing a threat to all three countries. And I think it is possible that they jointly monitor the border through patrolling and through other means, because as we are aware, and as was pointed out in that briefing by the DG ISPR, that because of terrain and other considerations, it is impossible, to fence the entire length and breadth of the border. So I think, provision of uh, border posts, patrolling, surveillance, etc., has to be done by all three countries in cooperation and collaboration with each other. Similarly, I think the defense of CPAC against various terrorist groups, particularly the BLA and its affiliates, and you also said that there is a clear access now among various terrorist groups like the TTP, Al Qaeda, ISIS, BLA, etc. That has to be broken, and I think China and Pakistan have to defend the CPEC together. And whether the threat emanates through the borders of Iran or Afghanistan, I think they also need to be integrated in this defense, because it serves their interest as well. Having said that, I think very quickly, this issue of defamation of state institutions, particularly the armed forces, is a very serious issue. And I think the DGI, SPR, correctly pointed out at the restriction on the freedom of action, freedom of expression, which are given in Article 19 of the Constitution, which very clearly says, that uh, defamation of the armed forces or the security establishment of the defense of Pakistan, it cannot be done, I think, through social media or through print media or other media. Similarly, there is Article 63 1G of the Constitution, which very clearly says that ridiculing of the armed forces or other state institution, including the judiciary, has very serious kind of repercussions. And if it is done by politicians, they could actually lose their membership of the parliament. But I think what is needed is that the FACA amendment ordinance, which was actually proposed by the previous government, it needs to be, but unfortunately, it was stopped by the courts. It needs to be actually reinstated so that defamation of the institution and propaganda against them can be stopped. And similarly, Section 500 of the Pakistan Penal Code about defamation must now include not only defamation of individual but also of institution. That was also proposed, by the present government, but I think this has not gone through. That also needs to go through, and that will effectively put an end, to the social media campaign against the armed forces or other institutions, which are actually, these efforts are supported by the Indians and the Indian propaganda and some other people with Western interests to drive a wedge between the armed forces and the society, or to divide, the civil society itself.
Right. Let me bring in Mr. Mir also into the discussion. Mr. Mir, as General Raza has put forth the relevant articles in Pakistan's constitution regarding freedom of expression, there are certain limitations also, as DG ISPR says, that the constitution of Pakistan accords freedom of expression to every citizen in Pakistan, but there are certain limitations and are also subjected to certain laws. Now, when it comes to the application or implementation of these laws, that's a separate debate. What about the awareness, spreading awareness among the general masses to let them know that defaming certain institution is going to have serious repercussions? What's the role and responsibility of media in that regard?
I think the media has to play a very positive role. Uh, we all have to follow the Constitution. There's no two ways about it. But at the end of the day, degrading our two major institutions like the judiciary and the army, well, that's not going to be doing any favors to our state. So that needs to be rectified from every quarter, from the politicians and from the social media and others. Our adversaries are all over. India, it'll never stop, doing propaganda against us. They've always been doing it. They've got these people from Balochistan standing outside the White House. If you go and see, there's one guy sitting out there and, propagating all kinds of atrocities being committed by us, which is totally, absolutely ill-fed. So what we need to do is, first of all, get our house in order. I mean, when we speak about TTP or BLA, as far as Pakistan is concerned, they're non-entities. They don't mean anything to us. They're outlaws, they're bandits, they're robbers, they're murderers, they're thieves, and they have no position in our country. So we need to be taking absolutely stern action against these, nefarious elements, which unfortunately we don't do. We've got to be as hard as they are, because they come along and target our innocent civilians, target our institutions, target our state organs. So why are we so lenient on that? We cannot afford to be lenient, because the moment we show some sort of leniency, our message across the world goes in a negative form. So we've got to come as hard as they are, and that's the end of the story. Now, as far as Afghanistan, India are concerned, they'll always play up against us. They've always been doing it. They'll always continue to do it. I mean, the barbed wire, the fencing, you know how difficult it was during General Musharraf's time, but we still continued. because they haven't accepted their border, although it has been approved in 1953 in the British Parliament that that is the final frontier, but they don't accept it. Okay, fine. Here is the same case. We are fighting another battle that is with India on Kashmir. Now, India has to realize Pakistan will not sit idle. You've already mentioned the amount of violations in the line of control. Well, how long will it take? Well, we're ready for it. We'll continue as long as it takes. So the next step is either we go on the road to peace, or we go on the road to confrontation. How long will that
Mr.
continue?
Mir, it shows a stark difference between the approach of Pakistani authorities as well as the Indian authorities regarding allowing the access to the United Nations observers over there.
Look, United Nations observers, we are the people who give complete and free access to the United Nations observers force. Whereas in India, they're not allowed. They're not allowed. They didn't even allow the British parliamentarians who had gone into Kashmir. I mean, in fact, they threw them out. And they came into Pakistan in Islamabad and they told us what had happened. So India is playing a very, very close-knitted, I'd say, an act of, I would dare say, even genocide, where they are not telling the world exactly what is happening in Kashmir. You've seen the blackout of the last, 2, 3 years, what they've been doing, to particularly to the Muslims. They've also been doing this to the Dalits, to the Tamils, to the Nagas, Mizus, Assam, Tripurans. Everybody they've been doing it, but no one speaks. And Jawad, that is where we need to be coming on equal, not equal, but a better terms in presenting a case on the international frontiers that this is what they're doing. All of a sudden, some minor incident occurs in Israel and the whole world wakes up. Whereas in Kashmir, no one talks about it. I mean, look at the amount of atrocities they've been. We've discovered mass graves there. They've been shooting pellets, on civilians, and they've been, raping our women out there, Muslim women out there, and no one takes notice of that. And this, I feel, needs to be taken at the highest possible level in the assembly.
Right. Right. Dr. Auqaab, is there any mechanism through which the UN can ensure that its observers are given the access and the right of appropriate action along the LOC?
The problem here is that India is a very large country and has intrinsic strategic interests and alliances, you could say, with the global superpower, the United States. So if they're not with it, they're not going to do essentially anything that may upset India. Because essentially they need India to counter China. And that is a bigger threat than a small area in the world that really they haven't paid much attention to for the past 75 plus years. So I think we have to continue talking about the legal aspects and international law. There's no doubt about that, because that's a legal basis for it all. However, reality is something else. Possession, 9/10 of the law, they say. The fact of the matter is India is committing atrocities in Kashmir. You do not hear anything in the Western media, primarily because that's not in their interest, because India is within their sphere of influence and they have to appease the Indians in that respect. And this is a massive, massive, massive compromise as far as human rights are concerned. So the moral foundations of Western moralism, you could say, when they talk about how human rights are, have gone to nothing, primarily because they ignore what they want and focus on other things, minor issues, to highlight them, to say that they're the victims, as opposed to the rest of the world, which is actually the victim in this. We can see what's happening in Africa and other countries in Asia, for example, how they've been subdued and sidelined, the economic development in Africa, for example, yet nobody takes account of that, primarily because that's not in the interest of the Western media, which is a dominant force.
The United Nations can do about it?
The United Nations...
For a moment, keeping the major powers aside for their economic interests, what about
You've got to appreciate that the United Nations is just an organization. It doesn't have any real power. United Nations is ruled by the veto system. If whatever the Americans, the British, and the French want to do, they will do. And they'll veto anything in that respect to the benefit of whoever their partners are. And the United Nations, unfortunately, a good idea a good ethos, a good way to the future. But the truth of the matter is they own nothing in real terms without the benefits that they accrue from Western nations.
Okay,
so they've got to do whatever they've got to do.
General Raza, unfortunately, we are short of time today. So, General Raza, as DG ISPR told that Pakistan Army struck down 6 spy quadcopters from the Indian side. How dangerous this particular trend is from the Indian side, and what Pakistan can do about it to highlight this particular issue to the international community and ask for the appropriate action?
Well, I think the international community, I think, understands that Indian laws cannot change, the international status of Kashmir, which is governed by the United Nations Council resolution, by the Shimla agreements, and a number of other agreements which are there, which are existing, and India and everyone else must actually accept and support those. And once that is done, I think these incidents will die down. They need to understand that this is a serious issue among 3 nuclear powers, and also that to that Kashmiris are also a party. So actually, this is an issue between those 4 parties. Having said that, I'll also like to go back to again very important point made, and that was that the Pakistan Army is a national army. It is not the army of any political party, and that dragging the army in politics would actually be very chaotic and would be disastrous. And I think it will very rightly mention that when this was done in other countries, it led to chaos. So I think the army, the conclusion was that it is going to be apolitical. It was apolitical in the past, and in the future also it will stay apolitical. It will have its own constitutional role to support whichever government is in power, and I think that needs to be understood by everyone. And once that is done, I think many things will settle all by themselves.
Right, General Raza, let me quickly touch upon Army Chief's visit to China. An official 4-day visit is underway. He had been given a warm welcome upon his arrival at the PLA headquarters, had a meeting with the commander of the PLA, and both commanders have reiterated the need for maintaining peace and stability in the region and enhancing military-to-military cooperation. What is the significance of this visit at this point in time, and how the military ties between the two countries have evolved over time?
The meeting today between the Chief of Army Staff and the Chief of the PLA, it was on the issue of regional stability. And we are talking of, when we talk of regional stability, it means whatever is happening or not happening in Kashmir, in Afghanistan, Iran, and in other countries of Asia. I'm sure that must have been discussed. The SCO meeting, which is taking place in India under the Indian chairmanship or chairpersonship, I think 3rd or 4th of May. I think probably that would also come under discussion. The joint defense of CPEC come under discussion. The military-to-military cooperation between China and Pakistan will come under discussion. So they will be a range of issues uh, which are of interest both not only China and Pakistan, but the entire region and within the ambit of SCO. I think all that will come into discussion, and we hope that both countries, not only the militaries, but I think there will be political and economic operations and moving forward also.
Right, Mr. Mir, what do you think? How Pakistan and China both can collaborate in the security domain for the regional peace and stability?
Been a bad weather friend. Uh, General Raza must have been in that same war. I fought in the 71 war here in on the Kasur sector, and when we ran out of guns, they were the ones who gave us the guns. What a force! And so they were always been there with us. But the question is, it's always interests. We've got to be looking after interests. Friendship is one thing, but mutual interests are more important. So, Chief of Army Staff, who's gone there, he has his own vision in comparison to the previous one or the previous one. So he will perhaps go along and give his vision because he represents Pakistan, and people of Pakistan have full faith in him. But what we need to do is, to your earlier question or observation, is, Jawad, that we need to be going to the OIC countries, to our Arab friends, that instead of giving them medals and everything, you ought to be putting sanctions on them. If you call a Brotherhood of Islam, then use that Brotherhood of Islam to the right sense. How can you see fellow your fellow religion people being massacred, being killed, being all sorts of atrocities? So I think this is the line we need to take. Yeah, I totally agree with my friend. Yes, India is far bigger than us. It has a better PR system. It is much more ingrained into the international markets. But we need to be coming out on the same lines. We cannot be, as they say, penny wise and pound foolish.
Right, Mr. Pervez Jamil Mir, your point is well taken. Thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Senior journalist joining us on Skype. And on Skype, we were joined by Lieutenant General Retired Raza Muhammad Khan from President National Defense University. General Raza, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. I would have loved to take your view regarding this important visit of the Chief of Army Staff to China, Dr. Auqaab Malik. But unfortunately, we are short of time. You are joining in the studio associated with the Center for International Peace and Stability at NUST. Thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next episode, take good care of yourselves.